After the death of Joshua and the other leaders of his generation, the Israelites started to disobey God. They started to live like the pagans. They worshipped statues of gold and stone and wood. So God let the Midianites conquer and oppress them for 7 years. After finding how hard it is to live without God's blessing, Israel cried out to God to save them from the Midianites. God chose a man, Gideon, to be a judge, someone to lead Israel back to worshiping God. Gideon was hiding his wheat from the Midianites, since something they would do is raid the farms, raid their food. And that's where an angel appeared to him and told him of God's mission for him to save Israel. Gideon was someone who needed assurance from God. He asked the angel for a sign of that this was true. So he prepared a meal and brought it to the angel, and the angel told him to set it on a rock. And then the angel touched the food with his staff, and it burned up. And then the angel disappeared. The first thing that Gideon did as God's appointed judge was destroy altars of Baal, an idol, and replace it with an altar to God. Some people didn't like what Gideon did, but God kept Gideon safe. And this is part of what he needed to do to lead Israel back to God. You have to take what's wrong out of your life so you can refill it with something good. Gideon wanted to be sure that the instructions he was receiving, the plan he had, was from God. He asked if the fleece he would leave outside would be wet and the ground around it dry, and God did so. The next day, Gideon found the fleece wet, but he still wasn't convinced, so he asked God to make the fleece dry and all the ground around it wet, and God did so. After getting Israel back on track, serving God and not idols, Gideon began getting an army ready to fight the Midianites. He had gathered 32,000 troops when God told him his army was too big. God told him to tell anyone who was afraid, who didn't want to be there, to just go home. And that left him with only 10,000 men, a third of his army. God then looked at Gideon's army and said it was still too big. So he told Gideon to make the men drink at the river. Anyone who dropped their head to drink at the river would be left out of the army. They were told to go home. Only those who dipped their hand in and brought it up to their mouths, allowing their head and eyes to stay up and looking and aware of their surroundings, they would stay in the army. This only left him with 300 men to fight an army of 135,000. For any general, this is an impossible task. There is no way Gideon could take credit for this victory. However, as we know from Joshua's example, we know God is always with those who are following his will. He will always make a way to do his will. God's plan was to have all 300 men take a torch hidden in a clay pot and a horn. They surrounded the Midianite camp during the night, and on Gideon's signal, they broke the pots covering their torches and blew their horns. In the confusion, the Midianite soldiers woke up and looked out of their tents at all the lights, the torches around them, and the horns, the noise, and they started just attacking whoever was near them. They started attacking themselves out of fear that an army was on them. God is not limited to our level of strength. When he gives us a command, there is nothing that can keep us from doing it. God will always make a way. Gideon faced an impossible task, but with God, nothing is impossible.